At JFK Airport, a 64-year-old black legal scholar was quietly handcuffed in front of dozens of travelers simply for standing still and reading a document. He stayed calm, gave them his ID, asked for their badge numbers. Nothing more. But what they didn't know was that the man they cuffed advised world leaders on human rights law, and one phone call was all it took to expose the truth. By the time the federal agent arrived, it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a full-blown international incident. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you believe quiet dignity can shake the system. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is just the beginning. JFK. International buzzed softly beneath the glow of the early morning. The sky outside was fogged in slate gray, a haze that had pushed back departures by nearly an hour. Travelers stood in scattered lines murmuring complaints or sipping lukewarm coffee from terminal kiosks. Among them, in the business class queue for Flight 218 to San Francisco, stood a man who barely moved. Dr. Marcus Ellison, 64, wore stillness like armor. He was tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and navy overcoat. His skin, deep brown and luminous beneath the fluorescent lights, gave way to silver strands that dusted the edges of his tightly cropped hair. A crisp boarding pass peeked out from his coat pocket. In one hand, he held a worn leather document folder. In the other, a court brief printed in fine, annotated font. He wasn't scrolling through a phone. He wasn't talking. He read in quiet concentration, underlining legal language with a blue pen, his breath slow, his posture precise. Marcus had spent 3 decades in courtrooms across 5 continents. He'd debated genocide law in The Hague, sat on commissions to investigate torture in wartime zones, and trained magistrates in developing democracies on constitutional protections. But today, he was simply a passenger, booked on a delayed flight to attend a federal conference in Oakland. 2 lines over, someone was watching him. Linda Mayfield had the sharpness of someone used to being believed. Mid-50s, blonde blowout cream blazer with matching flats. She held her designer handbag in front of her like a shield. Her husband Doug stood beside her, scrolling through sports news, oblivious. Linda's gaze never left Marcus. There was something off about him, she thought. Not dangerous exactly, just not right. He was too quiet, too self-contained. He hadn't once looked up from that folder, not even when they announced the delay. She tilted her head slightly, noting how he stood with perfect composure, like someone who didn't need to explain himself. She didn't like that. Not here. Not in an airport. Not from a man like him. She leaned in toward the gate agent, lowering her voice, but not her certainty. "Excuse me," she said, gesturing subtly with her eyes. "That gentleman in the long coat, I've seen him watching people. He hasn't moved, just standing there reading. Too still, too calculating." The gate agent blinked, confused. "He's in the business class line, ma'am. All passengers here have been cleared by TSA. "I know what I'm saying," Linda said firmly. "I travel a lot. Something about him feels off. I think you should report it before it becomes something worse." That was all it took. At 7:46 a.m., a routine security code was dispatched through airport channels. Passenger observation alert male, black, early 60s, standing still in the B-class queue. Possible surveillance behavior. The words were vague, but the effect, as always, was sharp. Across the concourse, 2 uniformed officers shifted from their post near the Hudson newsstand. One adjusted his belt, the other cracked his neck. Neither reviewed footage, neither asked a follow-up question. They had what they needed. Marcus didn't notice the officer's approach. Not at first. He was still underlining a paragraph on habeas corpus violations in cross-border detainment cases. The irony later would not be lost on him. Marcus sensed the presence before he saw them. 2 officers moved through the terminal with a kind of quiet purpose that wasn't meant to calm, it was meant to control. They flanked the line, one younger, one older, both in standard Navy airport security uniforms. Neither smiled. The younger one stepped forward first. Officer Travis Cole, early 30s. Tall, broad-shouldered, and walking with the swagger of someone who believed his instincts were the law. His jaw was tight, his sunglasses still perched atop his head despite the indoor lights. Beside him walked Officer Ben Harris, mid-50s, slower in pace with the kind of posture that had weathered too many gray areas and regretted more than he ever admitted. He said nothing, his eyes scanning the crowd before finally settling on Marcus. Cole didn't waste time. "Sir," he said sharply, stopping just inches from Marcus's shoulder. "Step out of the line, please." Marcus turned deliberate and unbothered. He held up his boarding pass and passport with one hand. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We've received a report," Cole said flatly. "We need to speak with you." Now Marcus's voice remained steady. "You may speak with me here. I'm in line for my flight and I'd appreciate some clarity." Cole stepped closer, tone hardening. "Sir, step aside. We're not asking." At that, Marcus calmly tucked his boarding pass into the pocket of his coat and handed over his government ID, a black and gold identification card marked with the seal of the Department of State. Underneath his name read Senior Legal Advisor, International Human Rights Division. "I assure you, I've cleared every checkpoint. I'm headed to San Francisco to deliver a keynote on due process standards. May I ask the basis of this concern?" Ben Harris blinked. A slight shift. But Cole didn't look down at the ID. There was a passenger complaint. He said, "You were seen acting suspiciously." "Suspiciously," Marcus repeated, "because I was standing still and reading." "Step out of the line," Cole said again, voice rising. People had begun to notice. A few travelers glanced over from nearby seats. One woman, mid-20s, slowly angled her phone toward the confrontation thumb hovering just above the record button. Marcus's expression didn't change. His voice remained low, controlled. "Officers, before we go further, I'll need your badge numbers. Please." Cole's jaw clenched. "Sir, are you refusing to comply?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm requesting transparency. It's my right to know who's detaining me and why." That did it. Without another word, Cole reached for the cuffs. Gasps snapped through the air like sparks. Several phones were already up now. One man whispered. He didn't even raise his voice. Another murmured, "He's got a diplomat ID." Click. The cold metal clamped hard around Marcus's wrists, in front of gate agents, in front of children, in front of people who had watched him do nothing more than stand with a file in his hand. Cole turned him with force, guiding him away from the line. "Let's go." Marcus didn't resist. His back remained straight, his face unreadable. If there was humiliation, it didn't show. If there was fear, it had no room to surface. Ben Harris trailed behind, finally glancing at the ID in Cole's hand. His brow furrowed, but he said nothing. Not yet. Linda Mayfield, still seated near the gate, watched the scene unfold with a satisfied smirk. "See," she whispered to her husband. "I told you he looked dangerous." But what Linda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the moment those cuffs clicked shut, something else had already started unraveling. A mistake they wouldn't be able to silence. And Marcus Ellison. He had just begun to take notes. The sound of Marcus's polished shoes on the terminal floor echoed louder now. Not because he walked any faster, but because the hush that followed him was deafening. He moved between rows of travelers with metal cuffed around his wrists, shoulders, square, steps, slow, not resisting, not rushing, just enduring. Officer Cole gripped his upper arm with unnecessary force. His jaw was tight posture, overinflated, as if dragging Marcus through the airport made him the hero of some unspoken crisis. Officer Harris followed behind, glancing around, not at Marcus but at the crowd. Because there was a crowd now. Phones were up, dozens of them, recording, watching, whispering. "Is that really happening?" someone said near gate C-12. "Did he even do anything?" a flight attendant muttered under her breath. No one could answer. But the footage was already uploading a shaky vertical shot from a teenage girl near the vending machines. She zoomed in as Marcus was led away and typed without hesitation. "This is what a suspicious passenger looks like. JFK, racial profiling, unreal." The video went live before Marcus even reached the checkpoint. Across the concourse, Linda Mayfield watched it all unfold from her window seat near the cafe, a steaming latte and handscarf perfectly folded around her neck. Her expression was smug satisfaction layered over self-righteous confidence. "They're just doing their job," she murmured to her husband, who barely looked up from his tablet. "Better safe than sorry." But Linda didn't see the phones, didn't hear the conversations building in low, indignant tones. Didn't know who Marcus Ellison really was, or how badly this was about to backfire. She had whispered suspicion. But the storm she unleashed would not whisper back. Marcus passed the security lounge head high, even as the cuffs pinched into his wrists. He didn't speak, didn't glance at the recording phones or the widening eyes. His silence was not weakness, it was message. Every footstep wrote a line in a story he hadn't asked to tell, but knew how to finish. A small child pointed toward him and asked his mother something neither of them would ever forget. "Why is the nice man in trouble?" The mother didn't answer. She only pulled the child closer. Behind Marcus, Officer Harris finally spoke, his voice a quiet murmur not meant for Cole to hear. "We should have double-checked the ID." Cole didn't respond. His grip only tightened at the edge of Terminal 4's hallway just before they disappeared behind the door marked security screening, staff only. Marcus paused, not of his own will, but because a TSA agent ahead raised a hand. "Wait, what's this about?" the agent asked. Suspicious behavior. "We're taking him in for questioning," Cole replied. The agent looked at Marcus, at the cuffs, at the crowd still watching. He said nothing else. He just stepped aside. Marcus didn't look back. He didn't need to, because the cameras had already recorded everything. Because the world, whether it knew it or not, had just taken its first step into something much bigger than a mistaken identity. And because Marcus Ellison, despite the cold bite of handcuffs and the sting of public judgment, had walked through too many courts, too many conflict zones, too many broken systems to be undone by this moment. He was not afraid. He was preparing. And what came next, they would not be able to contain. The door slammed behind them with a hollow clang, sealing out the terminal's bustle. Room 12 was colder than it needed to be, an intentional chill meant to unsettle. Fluorescent lights buzzed above like flies circling something already broken. The air reeked faintly of bleach and old sweat. Marcus Ellison sat in the metal chair without needing to be told. His wrists, still cuffed, rested on the table's edge. The table, scratched and dented from years of use, offered nothing. No water, no folder, no pretense of process, just a surface for suspicion. Officer Travis Cole paced the room like he owned it. Chin up, eyes narrowed, playing out the fantasy of interrogation he must have rehearsed in his head. The young cop leaned in close, voice sharp. "Start with your name." Marcus met his stare with quiet steadiness. "Dr. Marcus Ellison, U.S. citizen, professor of constitutional law, senior advisor to the United Nations Council on Human Rights." Cole smirked. "That's quite the resume, Doc. Bit convenient, don't you think I carry identification?" Marcus said, voice calm but clipped, "In my coat pocket." As you were informed, Cole didn't reach for it. He wasn't interested in answers. He was interested in performance, his own. Across the room, Officer Ben Harris stood near the wall, arms crossed but not confident. He had seen enough strange interactions over the years to know when something felt wrong, and this didn't feel right. He walked over to the evidence tray, removed Marcus's leather wallet, and pulled out the ID cards one by one. A State Department credential, AUN, diplomatic pass, a faculty badge from Columbia University. Every one of them checked out. He turned to Cole. "Travis, this guy's not lying." Cole didn't flinch. Fake IDs aren't hard to print these days. Not with embedded chips. "They aren't," Harris said, scanning the back of the pass under the terminal reader. It pinged once, clean and clear. The screen read, "Valid diplomatic clearance, level 3. Verified." Cole stepped in again, undeterred. "So maybe he's somebody. That doesn't mean he's not a threat." Marcus didn't speak. He didn't ask for the cuffs to be removed, didn't ask to call a lawyer. He'd been through this before. Not in this room, not in this country, but the scene was the same. The presumption, the posture, the refusal to believe that someone who looked like him could carry power without violence. "Do you have any weapons?" Cole asked, tone tightening. "No. Ever been convicted of a felony?" "No." "Why were you standing in line looking around like that?" "I was reading," Marcus replied evenly. "A transcript from a war crimes tribunal. That's supposed to impress me. It's supposed to be the truth." In the silence that followed, Harris took a step back. His eyes flicked between the screen, the badge, and Marcus's composed, cuffed figure. Something inside him cracked, not entirely, but enough. Cole, still wound up, slammed his palm flat against the table. "This is my investigation. You don't get to control how it goes." Marcus turned to him slowly. That, he said with quiet weight, is the problem. It wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. Harris looked at Marcus. Really looked this time, and saw not a suspect but a man trained to dismantle injustice with words sharper than any weapon. A man who had seen systems crumble under the weight of truth and had lived long enough to recognize when a room like this wasn't meant for facts. It was built for fear. Cole didn't care, but Marcus knew. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. The hum of the overhead light in room 12 seemed louder now. Officer Cole leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his tone laced with mock authority. Across the table, Dr. Marcus Ellison remained composed, wrists still cuffed to the metal loop embedded in the tabletop. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was weighting heavy, pregnant with the weight of what Cole refused to understand. "You can sit there all day quoting credentials," Cole said, tapping the folder in front of him. "But none of it explains why someone felt uncomfortable around you." Marcus didn't respond. He had already explained who he was. Twice. His voice had been steady, his words measured. He wasn't pleading. He didn't need to. The truth was on paper. It was encoded in the biometric chip of his passport, printed on the State Department seal, confirmed by Officer Harris's uneasy glance. Minutes earlier, Harris stood in the corner, no longer speaking. He had run the ID twice. UN legal advisor, U.S. State Department clearance. Marcus Ellison wasn't a name you found on watch lists. He was the man who helped write the guidelines used to build those watch lists. And yet here he was, chained to a table because a woman didn't like the way he sat still in a terminal. Then came the knock. It was brisk, intentional. The kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. It announces presence. Cole raised an eyebrow and turned toward the door, annoyed. "We're in the middle of..." The door opened anyway. A tall man stepped in, dressed in a charcoal overcoat with a slim leather folder tucked beneath one arm. His ID badge gleamed from a lanyard, silver and unmistakable. Agent Declan Rhodes, Office of Legal Oversight. Cole sat back, caught off guard. Harris straightened immediately. Rhodes's voice was calm, precise. "You're detaining a United Nations-affiliated legal advisor, without cause, without jurisdiction, and without probable cause. I'm here under directive from the U.S. Consulate and the Department of State." Cole blinked. "We received a complaint which you acted on without verification," Rhodes interrupted. "No corroboration, no flag on his record, no security breach, just a whispered suspicion." He stepped closer to the table and looked directly at Marcus. "Dr. Ellison, we apologize for the delay. You're free to go. I'll see to it myself." Marcus nodded, his voice measured. "Before I leave, I'd like your badge numbers, a record of detainment, and a written explanation of the basis for my arrest." Rhodes didn't flinch. "Of course." Cole hesitated, but Harris had already reached for the key. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrist gently, then stood, no rush, no flourish, no anger. "This wasn't a mistake," Marcus said, locking eyes with Cole. "It was a system working exactly as it was designed." And with that he walked out, his back straight, his coat unruffled. The door swung shut behind him. Back inside the room, Declan turned toward the two officers. "You'll be contacted by Internal Affairs. I'd suggest you retain counsel." No one spoke. Outside, Marcus stepped back into the terminal. The fog still delayed flights. The announcements still crackled overhead. But now passengers who had watched his arrest began to whisper again. This time not in fear, but in recognition. And the story was just beginning. The clip was just 17 seconds long. 17 seconds of grainy terminal footage showing a tall, well-dressed black man being cuffed in the middle of JFK's Terminal 4 by two white officers. No shouting, no struggle, just quiet disbelief recorded on 3 angles and captioned by a teenage bystander. This man just stood in line. That was his only crime. Within an hour, the video exploded across social media. By mid-afternoon, it had been retweeted by civil rights advocates, university deans, and even a former U.S. ambassador. Hashtags trended. Chiaj profiled 8 JFK. Drellison. Stillness is not suspicion. News outlets scrambled to identify the man in the footage, but they didn't have to search for long faculty websites. Archived lectures and UN records confirmed the same name across every source. Dr. Marcus Ellison, international legal scholar, architect of multiple human rights tribunals, and senior advisor to the U.S. delegation on humanitarian law. The story outpaced the spin. Reporters crowded outside JFK trying to get statements. Homeland Security released a bland acknowledgement of procedural review. The NYPD issued no comment. But the public didn't wait. Online forums filled with commentary, some outraged, some defensive, many shaken, not just by what had happened, but by who it had happened to. And then came the second wave. Screenshots surfaced of Linda Mayfield's online profiles, a travel blog, a few wine reviews, and one post from last year titled, "Sometimes You Just Know Who Doesn't Belong." It didn't take long. Her name trended next. By nightfall, Linda's business website was down, her phone deactivated. Public opinion wasn't just swift, it was surgical. But Marcus said nothing. He hadn't posted, tweeted, or spoken to the press. He hadn't returned calls from cable networks or responded to requests from late-night anchors asking for an exclusive. Those close to him knew he was back home in Washington, and they knew better than to mistake silence for retreat, because Marcus Ellison was writing not an op-ed, not a rebuttal, but a brief, a full legal memorandum proposing federal oversight on racial profiling in transit spaces. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a blueprint, pragmatic, prosecutable, and packed with years of legal precedent. By the time the video hit 5 million views, Marcus had already circulated a draft to 3 legislative allies and a quiet network of judicial scholars who owed him favors. Meanwhile, inside JFK's Internal Affairs Division, Officer Travis Cole sat in a windowless room. No badge, no weapon, just questions. The footage, now dissected frame by frame, showed no aggression from Marcus, no reason for escalation. Cole fidgeted, tried to justify his gut instinct, but every word dug deeper. His partner, Officer Ben Harris, had already requested private counsel, but Harris was talking. He admitted to doubts, admitted he'd seen the ID, admitted that after it scanned green, he still didn't step in. "I didn't want to contradict my partner," he said. "Didn't want to make it worse." The transcript of his interview would later become exhibit material in a disciplinary hearing. Back on social media, the noise grew louder. Not just about Marcus, but about pattern. Story after story emerged. Black travelers recounting similar moments of suspicion without cause. Airports weren't just gateways anymore. They were flashpoints. But through it all, Marcus remained quiet, composed until the right moment came, and when it did, he wouldn't need to shout. He'd bring change the way he always had, through truth written plainly and law sharpened like a blade. The room was quiet, not with absence but with anticipation. A rectangular conference table stretched across the center of a secure government building in Washington, D.C. Its oak surface gleamed under the overhead lights. Seated around it were 12 individuals: federal transportation regulators, civil rights attorneys, Department of Justice staffers, and 2 representatives from the National Airport Security Council. They had all read the headlines, they had all seen the video, but now for the first time they would hear from the man himself. Dr. Marcus Ellison entered without entourage or fanfare. He wore a charcoal suit, dark tie, and the calm that had become his signature. No cameras, no reporters. Just a closed-door meeting and a man with something that couldn't be ignored. He took his seat without delay. No speeches, no preamble. "I won't take up your time," Marcus began, voice low but deliberate. "But I'll ask that for the next 10 minutes. You listen, not as officials or bureaucrats, but as citizens." No one interrupted. He unfolded a single piece of paper. Not notes, just a timeline. 7:15 a.m. to 9:04 a.m. from the morning at JFK. Every minute accounted for. Every decision, every reaction, every failure. He described the stillness that made him suspicious, the silence mistaken for danger, the escalation that didn't come from action but from assumption. He recounted the cuffs, the walk through the terminal, the murmurs from the crowd. He didn't embellish, he didn't raise his voice, but his restraint cut sharper than outrage ever could. "This wasn't a lapse in protocol," he said. "It was a symptom of design. A system that defaults to force when faced with difference. One that's taught to act first and ask questions later, especially when the face it sees isn't familiar." A long pause followed. No one moved. Finally, the assistant director of the Office of Civil Oversight leaned forward. "Dr. Ellison, what are you recommending?" Marcus didn't blink. He slid a folder across the table, inside a 12-page draft entitled The Passenger Integrity Act, a framework for federally mandated anti-bias oversight in all U.S. transit hubs, third-party complaint review boards, transparent de-escalation reporting, a new tier of officer training focused on implicit bias, constitutional rights and civilian dignity. No headlines, just blueprints. One of the council members cleared his throat. "We've seen similar proposals fail in committee before. What makes this different?" Marcus met his eyes. "Because now there's footage, there's witness, there's urgency, and there's someone at this table who didn't walk away with bruises but with the authority to write the next page." He didn't need to say more. The table shifted, not with applause but with acknowledgement. Not everyone was convinced, but no one was dismissive. A tide had begun to turn, and Marcus hadn't raised his voice once. Outside, a quiet drizzle tapped against the windows. Washington moved as it always did, slowly with caution. But inside that room, something had broken open. Not a revolution, but a reckoning. And Marcus Ellison, seated in stillness once again, was no longer just a passenger with a briefcase. He was the author of what came next. The meeting room had fallen into a deep, deliberate silence. Seated at the head of the table, Dr. Marcus Ellison pulled a slim leather folder from his briefcase and placed it gently on the polished surface. No theatrics, no raised voice, just precision. "This," he said, "unfolding the front flap is not a rebuttal. It's a proposal." He slid a packet to each person in the room. 24 pages printed double-sided, annotated with color-coded highlights and footnotes, sourced from both federal and international law. The cover page bore the title in firm, serif lettering, Transit Accountability Initiative. It wasn't written overnight. Marcus had begun drafting it long before his morning at JFK. That incident hadn't sparked the idea. It had simply crystallized the urgency. He looked around the room. Department of Transportation officials, federal compliance officers, leaders from civil rights organizations, union representatives. Some were still thumbing through the first few pages. Others sat frozen, reading the bullet points on the summary sheet in front of them. The initiative called for 3 key reforms. First, independent audit panels. Every airport and major transit hub would be subject to quarterly reviews by non-governmental oversight boards. These panels would include civil rights attorneys, data scientists, and rotating community observers. Their findings would be public. Second, a national public-facing complaint dashboard. Every passenger who files a complaint regarding profiling, mistreatment, or abuse would receive a tracking ID, every incident resolved or not. Would be listed with timestamps, officer ID numbers, and outcomes. No more internal black holes. And third, mandatory anti-bias recertification for all law enforcement or security officers operating in transportation spaces. Not just a one-time diversity training, but a required federally monitored program. Annually renewed, tracked, and audited. Marcus didn't look at his notes. He knew every word. "This isn't about punishing people," he said quietly. "It's about making sure they no longer operate without reflection, without accountability. What happened to me happens to people who never get a camera, a witness, or a federal agent walking in that door. This initiative isn't personal. It's overdue." One official, a deputy from the FAA, cleared his throat and said softly, "Dr. Ellison, with respect, this goes far beyond current policy. It's bold, and it's going to upset a lot of entrenched institutions." Marcus looked him in the eye. "I was handcuffed for standing still. Upsetting the status quo isn't my concern. Preventing the next man from needing to carry a resume to prove he's not a threat. That's my concern." Another murmured, "We've never seen something this comprehensive, this surgical." But it wasn't just the proposal that left the room stunned. It was the delivery. Marcus had spoken without anger, without bitterness. His restraint was its own kind of force. In every carefully chosen phrase, he radiated something deeper than outrage, conviction. He stood at the end of the briefing, gathering his things as quietly as he had begun. "If you have edits, concerns, language you think needs refinement, send it to my office. I welcome scrutiny, but what we can't do is nothing." As he walked out, no one spoke. Not out of discomfort, but out of reverence. He had taken a moment of personal degradation and turned it into a structural solution. In a country where escalation often gets the spotlight, Marcus Ellison had done something rarer. He'd chosen to reform, not just react, and in doing so, he was about to change everything. The ink had barely dried on the final draft of the Transit Accountability Initiative when Dr. Marcus Ellison took his next quiet but seismic step. He founded the Ellison Institute for Civil Accountability, headquartered in Washington, D.C., a nonpartisan policy and training center designed to monitor racial justice in transportation and law enforcement sectors nationwide. What started as a ripple at Gate 42 of JFK had now become a blueprint for change that echoed through terminals, training academies, and legal chambers across the country. The Institute wasted no time. Within weeks, it launched investigations into 6 major international airports, analyzing patterns in detainment, profiling complaints, and officer conduct. Airports in Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, and Dallas came under review. The Institute partnered with legal clinics and civil rights scholars, building a data model that could detect trends of bias not by anecdotes, but by numbers. The results were staggering. Nearly 72% of random security escalations at major airports involved black or brown passengers. And in over 90% of those incidents, no formal charges or violations were ever recorded. That data, once abstract, now had a name and face behind it. Dr. Marcus Ellison. The public listened. So did the Department of Transportation. So did Congress. Back at JFK, the fallout was swift. Officer Travis Cole was placed under internal investigation and then suspended without pay. Publicly, the department cited procedural misconduct. Internally, the report was clearer: failure to verify ID, improper escalation, and violation of civil protocol. He'd made no formal apology, but the damage to his credibility was already permanent. Linda Mayfield, the woman whose whispered suspicion had triggered the arrest, faced her own reckoning. Her name had spread across social media. Not because Marcus outed her, he never spoke her name, but because the truth has a way of surfacing. Her employer, a Manhattan-based consulting firm, issued a brief statement. "We do not condone actions that compromise ethical standards or civil liberties." Linda resigned the same afternoon. Her whisper, once protected by privilege, now echoed louder than she ever intended. But not all names from that morning would be remembered with disgrace. Officer Ben Harris, the older, quieter of the two, became something unexpected. After the incident, he requested reassignment, not out of shame, but out of purpose. He enrolled in a new training module developed in partnership with the Ellison Institute. It focused not just on civil rights compliance, but on de-escalation, dignity-based policing, and cultural literacy. Harris later volunteered as a peer instructor, standing in front of recruits and repeating a line he admitted never fully understood until that morning. "Your badge doesn't make you right, it makes you responsible." His story became a fixture in the Institute's opening seminar. Marcus never sought vengeance. He didn't ask for resignations or resignations. He simply did what he'd always done. He built systems bridges, understanding. The Ellison Institute began hosting monthly symposiums, bringing together TSA agents, police chiefs, civil rights attorneys, and even passengers who'd once been profiled. It was part classroom, part confessional, part call to action. And through it all, Marcus stayed steady. No grand speeches, no press tour. He let the work speak. He once said to a young intern, "The law is a scalpel, not a hammer. Use it to cut out what's broken, not to punish, but to heal." And in healing, he was planting something deeper than policy. He was planting a culture shift, a quiet revolution built not on headlines, but on structure. The kind that doesn't just change one airport or one officer, but changes how an entire country sees itself at the gate. The auditorium at Howard University School of Law was filled to capacity. Rows of students in caps and gowns sat still, their eyes fixed on the stage. Families leaned forward in their seats. Faculty stood quietly along the walls, some already dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs, sensing the weight of the moment before a single word had been spoken. At the podium stood Dr. Marcus Ellison, dignified in a dark navy suit with a crimson silk tie. No prepared remarks, no teleprompter, just presence. He looked out over the sea of future lawyers, some bright-eyed, others battle-worn from the journey to get here. And then he began. "Justice," Marcus said, voice steady, isn't loud, it's clear. The room stilled further. It's not the one who shouts loudest in the courtroom who wins. It's the one who knows when to speak and when to listen. It's not always dramatic. Often it's patient. Often it looks like restraint in the face of disrespect. Like silence when the world demands outrage, and clarity when power hides behind confusion. He paused, letting the words settle. "Some of you will be asked to prove your worth before you're heard. Others will be seen as a threat before you're known. Don't let that shake your truth. Your role is not just to practice law, but to sharpen it, clarify it. Refuse to let it be distorted by fear or prejudice." Soft murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. "You don't change systems with volume," he continued. "You change them with vision." When Marcus stepped back from the podium, the applause began like rain, soft, scattered, and then swelled into a thunderous standing ovation. Not the polite kind reserved for distinguished guests, but the kind reserved for those who had lived. Something survived something, and then gave it back as something stronger. The next morning, Marcus walked alone through the departures terminal at Denver International Airport. It was quiet, still early. No delay this time, no fog. He wore the same long coat, same posture, same calm. He passed security, showed his ID. No one stopped him. No one whispered. No officer flanked his sides, just a nod from the TSA agent. A simple, "Have a safe flight, sir?" He smiled, not because he was above it now, but because it no longer had the power to define him. He walked past a newsstand. The front page of a legal affairs magazine caught his eye. The headline read, "The Ellison Standard, How One Man Changed Transit Justice in America." He didn't buy it. He didn't need to. As he moved toward his gate, he saw a young officer at the corner badge shining, watching him with quiet recognition. The officer gave a respectful nod. Marcus returned it and kept walking through the terminal, past the memory into the future. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that don't just speak truth. They demand it. Because what happened to Dr. Marcus Ellison wasn't about one airport or one mistake. It was about a system that still listens more to suspicion than to silence, that still sees skin before credentials. This story reminds us, racial profiling isn't gone. It still lives in boarding gates, courtroom lobbies, workplace elevators, and neighborhood sidewalks. It's not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper. In our personal lives, we must learn to pause before we judge. In our workplaces, we must create space for equity and truth. And as a community, we must demand systems that see clearly, not through fear, but through fairness, because dignity doesn't wear a badge. It walks quietly. And when we honor it, we build a more just, humble, and accountable world. Let this story be more than a moment. Let it be a mirror, a mandate, and a movement. And remember, they tried to erase his presence. He became the blueprint.